Hey everyone, I'm Richard.
I'm Tom.
And today we're going to be taking a look at the performance of top-tier graphics cards running in parallel. So, Tom, we're going to be looking at the GTX 980 Ti in SLI and the R9 Fury X in CrossFire.
So there's a lot of power there?
A lot of power indeed, almost like a bottomless pit of rendering power, if you like. So the question is really what we're going to test with it. And, well, in my experience, 4K resolution seems to be the ultimate litmus test for these cards. But in my experience, one card doesn't really cut it when it comes to running at max settings. So, what happens when we throw two of them at the problem? Well, check out these benchmarks. So, kicking off here with Battlefield 4.
These are the beasts of the combinations you get from either AMD and NVIDIA?
Yeah, basically 980 Ti, SLI, Fury X, CrossFire. You can see some interesting results here, which is essentially that. In a single card configuration, the 980 Ti monsters the Fury X here at 4K. But when you look at the CrossFire scenario, things change a little bit. I mean, the 980 Ti still has an advantage, but the Fury X is really holding its own. And if you look at the frame time graphs, basically, you know, there are some minor instabilities at these high frame rates, but both of them are really holding up. Scaling here on the 980 Ti, get an extra 56% of performance. And on the Fury X, well, that's the interesting one. You're getting 82.7, so it's really making up the difference, but it's not quite there.
It really bears out in Battlefield 4 as well. You can see
it. It's one of the games you can run at 4K 60.
So Shadow of Mordor, and it's a clear difference as well. It's almost a doubling of...
Yeah, basically on the AMD side, we're getting a 75.6% scaling advantage here by using two cards at 4K at max settings. We're getting 60% on the NVIDIA side. And basically, well, the AMD already has an advantage in single card, and that advantage kind of moves up to another level in SLI. Again, I believe that this game, you could run this at 4K, 60 Hertz, hopefully at a pretty consistent rate throughout.
And completely max settings, of course.
Yeah, I mean, it's fantastic.
Oh.
Yes.
Oh my, yeah, that's not a good sign already. That frame time on the Fury X CrossFire.
Yeah, Basically, this is one of the most disappointing results. We're only getting a 16% improvement in overall performance across the clip on the Fury X CrossFire. And on the NVIDIA side, it's a much healthier 53%. Well, I say healthier, I still think that's too low for basically running two cards in parallel.
Well, when you give, when you factor in how much these cards would cost.
Exactly, yeah. And yeah, the other thing, of course, to bear in mind there is the frame time differentials. If you look at the red line there, which is the CrossFire AMD, you can see that the frame times are spiking quite a lot more than they are on the NVIDIA equivalent. And basically what's happening here is that we are basically CPU bound. GTA maxed out will annihilate any CPU you care to throw at it. Even an 8-core CPU will struggle running this game maxed.
I think the thing that most frustrates me is it's actually doing worse with an SLI in terms of the frame time graph on the right than a single GPU.
Yeah, that's the same for both of the cards actually. The consistency sort of goes out the window, and basically what's happening there is that the game, we're removing GPU as a bottleneck, and when CPU is the limiting factor, then all manner of crazy things happen on frame time. And the reason why we're seeing these results is that we have maxed out the game completely, and the advanced distance scaling slider.
Extended draw distance.
Extended draw distance, okay. Yeah, basically, you know, it really forces the game to draw everything out into the distance, even when you can't really see it.
But at 4K, it kind of makes sense to have that as an option.
Yeah, you'd think so. Yeah, I still sort of hesitate as to how effective it is, and obviously it's having a huge effect on frame times, especially on the AMD side.
Right.
But you can actually, I would say you could easily dramatically increase the frame rates and smooth out the frame times just by paring back that setting.
And it's Assassin's Creed Unity?
Yeah, now this is an interesting one. Now, the frame time graph tells an really interesting story here. So you'll see that there are stutter manifestations there on the red line and the cyan line, which, if you look at the legend, it is the Fury X in single card and CrossFire scenarios. And what's happening here is Assassin's Creed Unity fully maxed out. At 1080p, it can push a 4GB card. At 4K, we've still only got 4GB available on the Fury X.
And that's not enough for 4K?
Yeah, we're overcommitting VRAM here, so HBM, you know, makes no difference here. We need a volume of VRAM, and we need more efficient utilization of it, and that's kind of what you're getting on the NVIDIA side. If you look, the amount of frame time spikes on the green line and the orange line are kind of, well, they're just sort of non-existent there. It's just consistent performance from start to finish.
It's a very smooth ride.
Smooth ride, yeah, but again, you know, frame rate's really low. You won't be running this one at 60 Hertz unless you drop down to medium settings.
Might need a 30 FPS cap.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so next up, Far Cry. Okay, so this is a really interesting one. Some really interesting scaling here. We're getting 82% scaling on the NVIDIA side and about 70% on Fury X. But what you'll notice, and this is quite interesting, is that the frame rates on Fury X CrossFire are higher generally. If you look at the combined average, well, it's pretty much the same, but I think across the duration of the clip it will actually come in higher towards the end.
I didn't notice that from the graph. That's interesting.
Yeah, but what's happening on the frame times, you know, you can see that the Fury X CrossFire, I think it's hitting CPU limits here.
And it's manifesting as the frame time again.
Yeah,
frame
stutter, gameplay stutter. I mean, you can see that, you know, both cards are affected there. I think because we're streaming in more environmental detail in the background. But you can see that generally stutter is much more prevalent on the red line, which is CrossFire AMD, whereas on a single AMD card, you get a much more consistent ride. And basically that's because one card doesn't hit CPU limits, two card does. Interesting stuff there.
Right, it's Ryse.
Son of Rome, yes, and the more modern CryEngine game we've got to look at. I mean, it's absolutely gorgeous. It's a masterclass in graphics technology. Yeah, good scaling here. We're getting 73% of additional performance on GTX 980 Ti, 68.7 on Fury X, and yeah, generally speaking, we do actually get higher frame rates on AMD here. This game does generally tend to favour AMD hardware.
There's more variability in the reading though. I'm seeing it going down and up.
Yeah,
above
I mean,
that.
you're not going to run this game maxed at 60 FPS.
That's true. Right, and it's CryEngine sibling Crysis 3.
Crysis 3, yeah, and let's have a quick look at the scalability metrics here. 56% on AMD, which isn't fantastic, but it's definitely much better than the GTX equivalent, which is 37.8. And something else which I'll draw attention to here is the green line. If you look at it, it's basically wobbling throughout the entire duration of the clip.
It's sort of a similar symptoms that we saw with other games on AMD cards, but this time the tables are turned.
Well, this is kind of different in that this is actual micro stutter.
Where does this come from? Do you know?
It's just basically from, I'm not really sure, but I suspect it may well just be the SLI implementation here. I actually tested this game on a 780 at 4K in SLI, and you get exactly the same phenomena, except that the micro stutter is actually more like macro stutter. It's just that much more pronounced. And AMD, I mean, obviously it's not perfect in terms of consistency, but it is better. That red line is kind of more consistent.
If I was in the market for a dual GPU setup, this would be, I'd go with AMD for this game.
Definitely. Generally speaking though, I just think we've kind of reached the point where our graphics technology is much more capable than the surrounding parts. So, you know, we're hitting limits elsewhere, getting lower utilization on SLI and CrossFire, and we kind of need that to improve. So, there we go then. It's almost like we have two tiers of game here.
Yeah, there seems to be those SLI and CrossFire configurations where you can hit 4K 60, and those that just can't do it.
Yeah, we're still sort of some way short of the target there, but I think what surprised me was that we were actually hitting CPU limits here with a 4790K quad-core chip, and I actually had that overclocked to 4.6 gigahertz.
And there's also 6 and 8 core CPUs we can try down the line, aren't there?
Yeah, I'm kind of thinking that if we're hitting CPU limits at 4K, even at 4K with a Fury X, well, we've got the octo-core 5960X, and we can overclock that to 4.4 gigahertz. That's almost a doubling of CPU power. It's probably completely overkill, but I can see that as a viable combination with two of these high-end GPUs if you're willing to spend $1,200 on that sort of hardware. Anyway, that's something we'll have to test in the future. And well, for now, that's all we've got. Please do give us a like if you enjoyed the video, and remember that you can help to support our work by subscribing. That's all we have for now. Thanks for watching.